Part 1. The conference chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive crystal sphere where the greatest minds of the galaxy gathered to discuss problems that threatened the peace of civilized space. Today, the Galactic Psychological Council had called an emergency session, and beings from 100 worlds filled the observation decks. Concern rippled through the assembly like waves on a dark ocean. At the center of the chamber, Council lead researcher stood perfectly still. His species had no body in the traditional sense, existing instead as organized patterns of thought held together by will alone. When he spoke, his words appeared directly in the minds of everyone present. "We have discovered something deeply troubling about the species to achieve interstellar travel," began. "The humans of Earth demonstrate a psychological abnormality so severe that we must question whether contact with them poses a danger to galactic civilization." Murmurs of alarm spread through the chamber. The humans had been welcomed into the broader community only 5 cycles ago, after they developed faster-than-light travel. They seemed friendly enough, if a bit odd. What could be so wrong? Activated the display, and holographic images filled the air. The first showed a human child, no more than 6 rotations old, sitting in a darkened room while an adult human read from a book. The child's eyes were wide, her small hands clutching a blanket. "This is what humans call a bedtime story," explained. "We assumed these would be tales of comfort and joy to help their young rest peacefully. Instead, we discovered that many of these stories are designed to frighten. This particular tale involves a monster that eats children who misbehave." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The nurturing collective, a species that protected their young in cushioned pods until maturity, recoiled in horror. "But surely this is abuse," said Council Member Thresh, her tentacles quivering with distress. "Why would parents deliberately traumatize their offspring?" "That is what we initially believed," replied, "but it gets worse, much worse." The display shifted to show a human educational institution. Hundreds of young humans sat at desks, their faces tense and pale. Many were visibly shaking. Some had tears in their eyes. "This is what they call an examination," continued. "Humans subject their young to regular assessments where failure results in shame, disappointment, and reduced future opportunities. Observe their physiological responses: elevated heart rates, stress hormones flooding their systems, shallow breathing. Every indicator shows these young humans are experiencing genuine terror." "This is monstrous," someone shouted from the upper gallery. "We must intervene immediately." "Wait," said his thought voice cutting through the growing chaos. "There is more you need to understand before we decide on action." The next image showed adult humans engaged in physical training. One sequence depicted humans running until their bodies collapsed from exhaustion, while other humans stood nearby shouting at them. Another showed humans deliberately lifting heavy objects in repeated motions that caused visible pain. A third showed humans throwing themselves out of aircraft with nothing but fabric to slow their fall. "They call this exercise and recreation," said. "They push their bodies to the point of damage, driven by fear of weakness, fear of aging, fear of death itself." The display continued its horrifying parade. Humans entering buildings specifically designed to frighten them, paying currency for the experience. Humans watching fictional stories on screens while covering their eyes in terror, yet unable to look away. Humans choosing careers where death was a daily possibility. Humans climbing mountains, diving into oceans, exploring caves, all while knowing that one mistake meant oblivion. "And perhaps most disturbing of all," said, bringing up financial records and work schedules. "Humans regularly deprive themselves of sleep, rest, and sustenance while laboring toward goals they call deadlines. They describe being driven by fear of failure, fear of disappointing others, fear of being left behind by their peers." Council member, whose species had eliminated all stress responses through careful genetic engineering 10,000 years ago, stood from her seat. I have reviewed the psychological profiles. What you describe is not motivation. It is torture. These humans are trapped in a cycle of self-inflicted trauma. They are, by every measure we understand, engaged in civilization-wide self-harm. Form pulsed with agreement. That was our initial assessment as well. We believed we were observing a species in the grip of a collective mental illness. A species that had evolved fear responses so powerful that they dominated every aspect of life, creating a civilization built on suffering. Then we must help them, declared Ambassador of the Peaceful Dawn. We have therapies, technologies, genetic treatments. We can free them from this curse. That is why I called this emergency session, said. Before we intervene, before we attempt to cure the humans of their affliction, we need to understand something that makes no sense according to any psychological framework in our databases. The display changed again, this time showing human achievement records, artistic masterpieces created under the pressure of patronage and poverty, scientific breakthroughs made by researchers racing against their own mortality, humanitarian efforts driven by fear of loss, technologies developed because humans were terrified of the alternatives. Despite their constant state of fear-driven stress, said slowly, or perhaps because of it, humans accomplish the impossible with alarming regularity. They break their own records constantly. They push boundaries we did not know existed. They attempt things that no rational being would try, driven by fears we eliminated from our own species ago. The chamber fell silent. Every being present was processing this contradiction. There is something else, added. When we interview humans about their fear, they do not speak of it as we would expect. They do not beg to be freed from it. Instead, they speak of it with a strange sort of respect. One human athlete told our researchers, and I quote, "Fear is what makes me faster. Without it, I would be nothing." Madness, muttered someone in the gallery. Perhaps, agreed. Or perhaps something we have never encountered before. I propose we commission a specialized study team to embed themselves among humans and determine the true nature of this phenomenon. We need to understand whether humans are suffering from a treatable condition, or whether they have discovered something about fear that the rest of the galaxy abandoned too quickly. Council member Thresh raised a tentacle. And if we determine they are suffering, if we confirm this is destructive, then we help them, said firmly. We cannot stand by while an entire species torments itself. But if we are wrong, if there is something more complex happening here, premature intervention could do more harm than good. After much debate, the Council voted to approve the study. They selected of the Serenity worlds to lead the team. Species had achieved perfect inner peace through meditation and chemical balance. They no longer experienced fear at all, having evolved beyond it. If anyone could objectively assess the human condition, it would be someone who could not feel the emotion themselves. Accepted the assignment with some reluctance. She had studied thousands of species across the galaxy, and all of them had been healthier and happier after eliminating or reducing their fear responses. The humans seemed to be wallowing in an evolutionary dead end, clinging to primitive emotions that served no purpose in modern civilization. As she prepared her team for departure to Earth, reviewed the footage again. Human faces twisted in terror. Human bodies pushed beyond rational limits. Human children learning to be afraid before they could barely walk. It looked like suffering. It felt like suffering. By every metric the galaxy understood it was suffering. But there was something in those human eyes that bothered her. Even in their fear, even in their terror, there was something else. A light, a determination, a spark that seemed to burn brighter the more afraid they became. Told herself it was probably just adrenaline, just biology, just the last gasps of a species that had not yet learned to be truly civilized. But deep in her perfectly peaceful mind, a small voice wondered if perhaps the galaxy had forgotten something important when it chose serenity over struggle. The terror study team departed for Earth 3 days later, convinced they were about to document one of the greatest tragedies in galactic history. They had no idea how wrong they were. Part 2. Team materialized on Earth during what humans called spring. They had chosen various forms to blend in, using advanced holographic technology that made them indistinguishable from the native population. Herself appeared as a middle-aged human woman with kind eyes and an easy smile. Her 3 team members took similar forms, each assigned to observe different aspects of human fear-based behavior. Their first subject was a human named Sarah, a medical student in her final year of training. Followed Sarah through her daily routine with growing concern. The young woman woke each morning after only 4 hours of sleep, her first action to check something humans called a study schedule. Even before consuming food, Sarah would spend 30 minutes reviewing complex biological information, her hands trembling slightly as she turned pages. Subject shows clear signs of chronic stress, recorded in her neural log. Sleep deprivation is voluntary but appears compulsive. She fears something called the licensing examination. Watched as Sarah attended lectures where human instructors described diseases in graphic detail, showing images of suffering and death. The students did not look away. Instead, they leaned forward, taking notes, asking questions about the worst possible outcomes. They seemed to be deliberately filling their minds with nightmares. "Why do you do this to yourself?" finally asked one day, unable to maintain scientific distance any longer. She had approached Sarah in the university library, where the young woman sat surrounded by towers of books, her eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Sarah looked up, surprised by the question from this stranger. But something in his expression must have been sympathetic, because she answered honestly. "Because if I don't know what can go wrong, I can't fix it," Sarah said. "Every terrible thing I learn about, every disease, every complication, every way the human body can fail, that's knowledge I'll need when someone's life is in my hands." She paused, rubbing her tired eyes. "I'm terrified of the exam, yes, but I'm more terrified of being a doctor who doesn't know enough to save someone." Try to process this. You are using one fear to overcome another. "I guess so," Sarah said, managing a weak smile. "My instructor says fear makes you sharp. It makes you pay attention. A doctor who isn't afraid of making mistakes is a dangerous doctor." Over the following weeks, observed Sarah push herself beyond what should have been physically possible. 36-hour study sessions. Meals consumed in minutes between practice examinations. Simulated patient scenarios where Sarah had to make life-or-death decisions while instructors shouted complications at her, changing variables, adding chaos. The young woman made mistakes. She broke down crying twice. She told her friends she wanted to quit at least 5 times. But she never did quit, and each time she faced the simulations, she performed better. The fear did not break her. It forged her into something stronger. Meanwhile, his teammate was observing human athletic training. He had embedded himself at a facility where humans train to fight fires, one of the most dangerous occupations on Earth. The trainers were, by any rational standard, sadistic. They sent trainees into burning buildings, real fires consuming real structures. They created scenarios where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They pushed the humans until they collapsed, then pushed them further. Watched one instructor corner a trainee in a smoke-filled room and shout at him until the young man found a way out that he had not seen before, driven by pure panic. "This is torture," reported too. "They are deliberately traumatizing these subjects." But when interviewed the trainees afterward, they did not describe trauma. They described transcendence. "I was terrified," one trainee explained, still covered in soot and sweat. "My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. But then something clicked. The fear became clarity. I stopped thinking about being afraid and started thinking about solutions. It was like the fear burned away everything except what mattered." Another trainee, a woman who had frozen during her first simulation and been pulled from the building in shame, returned the next day. And the next. and the next. Each time she lasted longer, performed better, until finally she completed the simulation flawlessly, tears of relief streaming down her face. Fear teaches faster than anything else, the head instructor told. You can lecture someone about fire safety for hours and they'll forget it in a week. But let them feel real danger once, let them understand what's at stake, and they'll remember for the rest of their lives. The third team member had taken the strangest assignment. She was observing human entertainment, specifically the phenomena of horror films and what humans called thrill-seeking. She reported back with complete bafflement. They pay money, said, her voice filled with confusion. They actually exchange currency for the experience of being frightened. I watched a group of humans enter a building designed to simulate a haunted location. Actors jumped out at them. They screamed. Their fear responses were genuine, and when they emerged, they were laughing. They described it as fun. Joined at a human cinema where they watched a film designed to terrify. The humans in the audience clutched their seats, gasped, some even covered their eyes. But none of them left. When the film ended, heard them discussing it with excitement, already planning to see more. I do not understand, admitted. They experience genuine fear, genuine distress, and yet they seek it out repeatedly. This should be evidence of psychological damage. Unless, said slowly, they are practicing. Practicing what? Being afraid, managing fear. Every time they voluntarily enter a frightening situation with low real stakes, they are training themselves to handle fear when the stakes are high. Began to see a pattern. Sarah studying terrible diseases to overcome her fear of ignorance. The firefighters training in real danger to overcome their fear of failure. The film audiences exposing themselves to fictional terrors to build resilience against real ones. Humans were not trapped in their fear. They were deliberately cultivating it, using it as a tool for growth. The breakthrough came when attended a human educational lecture on their own history. The professor, an elderly man with silver hair, described humanity's journey from primitive tool users to space-faring civilization. Every major leap forward in human achievement, the professor said, has been motivated at least partially by fear. We learned to make fire because we feared the cold and the predators in the dark. We built walls because we feared our enemies. We developed medicine because we feared disease. We reached for the stars because we feared being alone in the universe, trapped on one fragile world. A student raised their hand. But isn't fear a negative emotion? Shouldn't we work to eliminate it? The professor smiled. Many have tried. There have been movements throughout history to create fearless societies, to medicate away anxiety, to engineer courage chemically. They all failed, and do you know why? The students waited. Because fear is information. Fear tells us what we value. A person who fears nothing either has nothing to lose or does not understand what they could lose. Fear of failure drives us to prepare. Fear of death drives us to live fully. Fear of insignificance drives us to create meaning. The goal is not to eliminate fear, but to channel it, to transform it from a prison into a compass. Recorded every word. This was not psychology as the galaxy understood it. This was something else entirely. That night, she compiled her team's findings and sent a preliminary report back to the council. The conclusion surprised even her. Humans have not failed to evolve beyond fear, she wrote. They have evolved a relationship with fear that no other species has achieved. They have domesticated their own terror response, transforming a survival mechanism into a tool for transcendence. Where other species evolved to avoid fear or medicated it away, humans deliberately maintain the capacity for terror and learn to harness it. They use fear as a teacher, a motivator, and a forge for personal growth. The council's response came quickly. Himself contacted her. Your findings are rejected, he said flatly. You have been on Earth too long and are suffering from observational bias. Fear is destructive. This is established psychological fact across hundreds of species. Prepare to return for debriefing and replacement. But refused. With respect, council leader established fact may not be universal truth. Request permission to continue observation and compile comprehensive evidence. There was a long pause. Finally, agreed but with clear skepticism. You have 30 more days, but know this. If you return claiming that suffering is beneficial, that pain is productive, you will have wasted your career on madness. Accepted the terms. She had 30 days to prove that everything the galaxy thought it knew about fear was wrong. She had 30 days to show that humans had discovered a superpower the rest of the universe had abandoned. Part 3. The final phase of research took her deep into human society. She attended a gathering of human scientists working on what they called terminal illness research. These were individuals who studied diseases that killed their own species, searching desperately for cures they might never see. Doctor was dying. He had been given 6 months to live, maybe 8 with treatment. The cancer in his lungs was aggressive and had spread before detection. Watched him work 18-hour days in his laboratory, his hands shaking from medication, his face gaunt from illness. Why continue? Asked him during a quiet moment. Your people have excellent comfort care. You could spend your remaining time in peace. Looked at her with eyes that burned with something fiercer than pain. Because I'm terrified, he said simply. I'm terrified that the answer is close, that I might be the one who sees it, and if I stop now, someone else will die because I chose comfort over discovery. He gestured to the walls covered in research data. Fear is fuel. It's burning me up, yes, but it's also pushing me forward faster than I could ever go without it. 3 weeks later, his team announced a breakthrough. Not a cure, not yet, but a treatment that showed remarkable promise. Died 4 days after the announcement, but attended his memorial service. She listened as humans spoke of him with reverence, calling him a hero. One colleague said something that recorded and marked as critical evidence. Used to say that fear was a gift from evolution, a signal that something mattered enough to fight for. He was afraid of death, so he fought it with everything he had. He lost his personal battle but won something larger. That is what humans do. We transform our fear into legacy. His teammate had followed one of the firefighter trainees, a young man named James, for the entire study period. James had progressed from someone who panicked in simulations to someone who ran toward danger with clear-headed determination. Was present the night James faced his first real emergency, a residential fire with a family trapped on the upper floor. Watched as James entered the burning building, his fear visible but controlled. The young man moved with purpose, following his training, using his terror as heightened awareness rather than paralysis. He found the family, led them to safety, and emerged from the flames just as the roof collapsed. Later, sitting in the fire station, James's hands trembled as the adrenaline wore off. I was terrified the entire time, he admitted to. But my instructor's words kept echoing in my head. Fear makes you sharp, so I used it. I let it sharpen my senses, focus my mind. Without the fear, I might have been reckless. The fear kept me alive and let me save them. Meanwhile, had made an unexpected discovery in her study of human creative endeavors. She attended a performance by a classical musician, a pianist named who was making her debut at a prestigious concert hall. Backstage before the performance, was physically ill with fear, her entire body shaking. Why perform if it causes such distress? Asked. Laughed weakly. Because the fear means it matters. The first time I performed without feeling afraid, I knew something was wrong. I was going through the motions. But when I'm scared, when I'm terrified I'll fail, that's when I reach for something greater than myself. That's when I play not just well, but transcendently. Watched the performance. Fear was transmuted into something magnificent. Her playing had a passion, a depth, an urgency that had never heard in the perfectly controlled music of galactic civilizations. It was beautiful because it was desperate. It soared because it was fighting against the weight of possible failure. As the 30-day deadline approached, compiled her final report. She included medical data, psychological profiles, historical analysis, and hundreds of recorded interviews. The evidence was overwhelming and pointed to a conclusion that would shake the foundations of galactic psychology. She titled her report The Fear Advantage: How Humans Weaponized Evolution's Warning System. The council convened in the same crystal chamber where had first presented his concerns. Stood at the center, her holographic form appearing as her true self now, not bothering with human disguise. Every seat was filled. Word had spread that this report would be controversial. "Honored Council," began, "I have spent the last 60 days observing humans in their natural environment. I have watched them suffer. I have watched them struggle. I have watched them push themselves beyond what should be survivable limits, and I have reached a conclusion that contradicts everything we think we know about fear." The chamber was silent. Activated her display, showing the footage her team had collected. Other species evolved to avoid fear or eliminated it through technology and genetics. We saw fear as a primitive response, something to be conquered and discarded on the path to enlightenment. But humans took a different path. They did not eliminate fear. They domesticated it. She showed Sarah passing her licensing examination with exceptional scores, then working as a confident physician in an emergency room. Her earlier terror transformed into competent urgency. Humans use fear as a crucible. They deliberately expose themselves to controlled doses of terror to build resistance and capability. What we interpreted as self-harm is actually self-improvement. What we saw as suffering is actually training. She showed James entering burning buildings with controlled determination, his initial panic now refined into functional vigilance. Where we use simulation and calm instruction to teach, humans use real stakes and genuine fear. The result is deeper learning, faster adaptation, and a level of motivation that we cannot achieve through our peaceful methods. She showed breakthrough, achieved by a dying man racing against his own mortality. Humans accomplish the impossible because they are afraid of the alternative. Their fear of failure drives them to succeed in ways that beings without fear cannot comprehend. They do not thrive despite their fear. They thrive because of it. Form pulsed with agitation. "You are suggesting that eliminating fear from our own species was a mistake, that we should reintroduce terror into civilized life." "No," said firmly. "What works for humans may not work for others, but we must acknowledge that humans have discovered something we missed. They have found a way to extract benefit from an emotion we only saw as cost. They have turned suffering into strength, terror into triumph." She brought up her final piece of evidence, a speech by a human philosopher recorded centuries ago. "A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. Fear is the warning that we are attempting something that matters, something that could fail, something that requires our very best. A life without fear is a life without stakes, and a life without stakes is not a life at all." Council member Thresh spoke up, her voice troubled. "But surely they pay a cost for this, the stress, the suffering." "They do," acknowledged. "Humans have shorter than many species, partially due to stress. They experience mental health crises. They burn out. But when you ask them if they would trade their fear for our peace, the vast majority say no. They view their capacity for fear as integral to their humanity. To remove it would be to remove something essential from who they are." The debate lasted hours. Some council members insisted humans were still suffering from a treatable condition and needed intervention. Others argued that interfering with human psychology would be a grave violation of autonomy. But slowly, a consensus emerged. Finally spoke, "I believe I understand now, though it troubles me. Humans are psychologically extreme by our standards. They maintain emotions and responses we evolved beyond or eliminated through treatment. But this does not make them damaged. It makes them different." He paused, his thought voice carrying weight. The question is not whether humans should stop being afraid. The question is whether we can coexist with a species that has chosen a fundamentally different relationship with suffering than the rest of the galaxy. Felt relief wash over her. They are not a threat, Council Leader. If anything, they are an asset. When the galaxy faces something terrifying, something that would paralyze species who eliminated fear, humans will run toward it. Not because they are not afraid, but because they have learned to be afraid and act anyway. The Council voted to update humanity's classification from psychologically unstable to psychologically extreme but functionally adaptive. More importantly, they voted to end all discussion of intervention or treatment. Humans would be allowed to continue their unique evolutionary path. As the Council session ended, approached privately, "You have challenged our fundamental understanding of emotion and motivation. This will require further study." "Yes," agreed, "and perhaps we should ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Which is, in seeking perfect peace, perfect serenity, perfect freedom from fear, have we lost something important? Not everything the humans have, perhaps, but something. The capacity to be truly desperate. The ability to feel that urgent, consuming need to act. Humans accomplish miracles not despite their fear but through it." Was silent for a long moment. A troubling thought. We have spent millions of years building a civilization based on the elimination of suffering. "And you have built something beautiful," said. "But humans have built something different, something raw and desperate and powerful. A civilization that runs toward the darkness instead of away from it." The report was distributed throughout the galaxy, and humans suddenly found themselves viewed with a mixture of awe and wariness. Other species began to understand that humans were dangerous not because they were warlike or irrational, but because they possessed a capability others had abandoned. The capacity to be afraid and act anyway. The ability to transform terror into determination. The power to use fear as fuel rather than barrier. One human diplomat, when informed of the Council's findings, laughed and quoted something from human literature. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear." The galaxy had spent eons trying to eliminate fear from civilized life. Humans had spent their entire existence learning to dance with it, to harness it, to transform it from enemy into ally. As prepared to return to her, she took one last walk through a human city. She watched humans rushing to work, nervous about deadlines, parents worrying about their children, students anxious about exams, artists terrified of criticism, scientists afraid of failure. And she understood now that all this fear, all this controlled suffering, was not a burden humans needed to shed. It was their superpower. The galaxy had chosen tranquility. Humans had chosen something harder, something more painful, but ultimately something more powerful. They had chosen to feel everything, including fear, and to use that feeling to reach heights that peaceful species could only imagine. Filed her final note in the permanent record. Do not underestimate a species that runs toward what frightens them. In the moment of true galactic crisis, when something comes that terrifies even the most advanced civilizations, remember the humans. They have been preparing for that moment their entire existence. They call it courage. We might call it madness, but perhaps they are the same thing.